Welcome to See Me Teach Level 5 training. In this training video, we're going to look at how you collect data using the S codes. And then we're going to look at using both the S and M codes. And finally, how you use the seating chart when you're collecting S and M codes. Now, the S codes are student engagement codes that note student actions either individually or in a small group, such as when students answer questions or ask questions, or make comments to the teacher or other students, or in whole group settings where they might use dry erase boards to respond, or digital devices such as phones or computers or laptops to respond, or they might be engaged in a think, pair, share exercise to communicate with each other. Then we're going to look at using the S codes and M codes together and using the seating chart in conjunction with the S and M codes to provide rich data on individual students with regard to student engagement and student misbehaviors. So first of all, why do we capture student actions either through S codes or M codes or both? Well, student actions are indicators of how or even if students are engaged in the lesson. By looking at how they answer questions, or if they're answering questions, or making comments or statements to each other or the teacher. It really shows the level of communication between the student and the teacher, or between students and other students. These are really, really important indicators of student engagement, and whether students are passive recipients or actively engaged in the lesson, or even engaged at all. So collecting this data gives us the who, the how much, and in what manner. Who is engaged, who is getting left out, and with better data, teachers can make better decisions and alter plans to get more students engaged in the lesson. So the S-code data and information that we collect shows how the teacher decisions can impact teaching and the learner that are made while teachers are planning for teaching or made while they're teaching. And these things can be modified to have a greater impact and a more positive impact on the learner and on student engagement as evidenced by the S codes. So let's take a look at the individual student S codes. First of all, there's only 5 of them. S1 is when student asks the teacher a question. And all these keys have little labels on us to remind us of what the key means, or the click will indicate. And S2 is when a student asks a student a question. S3 is when a student comments to the teacher. And S4 is when a student comments to another student. And S5, which we use quite a bit, is when a student answers a question that is posed by a teacher or another student. So the next 4 codes are for whole group, response, and engagement. S6 is when the teacher asks the whole group, all the students, or most of them, to respond to a question using their personal dry erase boards, which is pretty common in classrooms now. S7 is when they use a digital device to answer a teacher's question, a phone, a laptop, any kind of digital device. And S8 is when the teacher says, all right, here's my question, pair up, think about an answer to this question, let your partner know what your answer is, listen to theirs. So the basic classic think, pair, share strategy. And S9 is simply when the teacher asks a question and the whole class responds at one time. There's only 9 of these S codes, and they're pretty easy to remember. And if we can't, we just simply look at the key with the label on it. Okay, now let's take a look at how we actually collect the data and use S codes while we're collecting the data. So first, let me create a new observation again. Let me do this fast because you already know how to do this. So I'm going to put my URL of my video in here. It's a float sync lesson that I've done. I'm going to choose myself as a teacher. I'm going to save and continue because I want to create a seating chart. Remember that you click on the student icon until it turns blue. I'm teaching the 5 avatar students again, so let me click right here with the 5 students and their seating, and click Save and Start, and click Quantitative, and start the observation. All right, now here's my video. And let's take a look at what we have here again. So the video window, the play, the pause, the clock, the seating chart 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for my students who are seated in that arrangement. Let's ignore all the green teacher codes today. We're only going to focus on the S codes over here. Remember, the first 5 are the individual codes, the next 5 are the group codes. So ignore all these green ones. For now, let's not even look at or consider these M codes, the misbehavior codes. We'll tack those in when we become more comfortable with the S codes. And remember our first rule. When we press play in the video, we also go over here and press one of these blue lesson code buttons. So our timing clock, when we're collecting data, matches up with the clock in the video. So let me do that first and hit pause. So I'm going to hit play in the video, and since I'm doing a demonstration, I clicked on demo. Now my clock is going to be synced, and I paused it. So now as we watch this lesson, I'm only going to look for actions that relate to what students are doing. Students asking teacher a question, students asking students a question, student commenting to the teacher, student commenting to another student, or a student answering the question. Keep in mind that S5 is used a lot. You'll learn that key first because you'll be going there most of the time. Now, it's really hard for me to narrate this little video segment and have the voice of my teaching come through. So I'm going to play for a little bit until we see our first student code. Then I'm going to hit pause in the video and show you which button I'm going to click over here. All right, let's try this. So I asked the students, hey, how you doing? And Ed here answered the question. So right after Ed finishes, and remember our rule number 2 with our S codes and our T codes, all the event and timing codes, as you learned early on in this training, you click it at the end of the event. So you listen, and as soon as Ed stopped talking, if I didn't hit pause, I would have clicked S5. All right? Now let's play a little more. And Ed followed it up not only with saying, hey, I'm fine, but how are you? And I could have clicked student ask the teacher question. As soon as he said, how are you? I could click that. And notice up in the running record window, what we've clicked shows up. So it reaffirms what we did click. So let's watch some more.
Appreciate that. Hey, today I got what I think is going to be kind of an interesting lesson for you that applies to a lot of different things we need to know about in life. So the basic gist of this lesson today is why things float and why things sink. And the first thing I want each one of you to do is to tell me something that you know that floats. We'll start with Sean since your hand is raised. Thank you, Sean. What's something that you know that floats?
A fish.
A fish.
Okay, so I asked a question. Sean responded. I'll click S5, answer the question. Let's play more.
And how about CJ? What do you know that floats?
Boats.
Say that again.
Okay, so CJ gave an answer that I couldn't quite hear, but we still acknowledge that she did say something. So as soon as she finished, I would click S5.
Again?
Boats.
Okay,
Boats.
so
Boats float. Yes, absolutely.
she said boats, and so click S5 again, and we play more.
And Kevin.
Yeah.
Kevin, what's something that you know that floats?
Like leaves?
Click.
Leaves. You've seen leaves on water, right? Float?
Yeah.
And what's something that you know that floats?
Something that floats. Well, those are all good suggestions. So I would say swans.
Click.
Swans, absolutely. And
So you notice I'm letting it run, and when I click on S5, I'm just saying click now at this point. So you can see and hear that I'm clicking. As soon as the student finishes responding, I'm clicking on the appropriate S code. And notice this is fairly easy and low pace because we're not clicking on any other codes other than the S codes right now. Later on, we'll add in what the teacher is also doing. And so we'll be clicking on T codes and S codes. But right now, don't worry about it. Let's just get used to the S codes. Let's play just a little bit more.
Maria, one thing that floats that you know of.
Pretty much all the good answers are taken.
Click.
Okay. So you want to think about it for a while?
Yeah.
Okay, excellent.
Click.
Now, I'm going to challenge your brains today. I know this is one of the smartest classes of students that I have. So I actually picked a challenge that I think will tickle your brain today. So look at what I have on the table here. If you'd all look up here, I have this little aquarium full of water. And I have some blocks of wood that are numbered, and I have 1 through 6. There's these little blocks of wood here. There are different kinds of blocks of woods. I'm sorry. And the reason I brought this today was, I got to tell you a little story. My friends and I.
Now, I'm going to pause this for a bit because the story is, two, 3 minutes long, and then it goes into a lot of questions and a lot of student answers. But basically, that's all you do. As soon as a student finishes answering a question, you click on 5. If they make a comment to the teacher, you click on S3. Or if they ask the teacher a question, you click on S1. And that's something that we're going to ask you to go ahead later in this lesson, is to load up this lesson and practice all the way through this 20-minute lesson of just entering your S codes, so you become comfortable with the S codes and you become familiar with where they are and clicking at the end of the event. Now, let's expand this a bit. You already learned about the M codes. Remember, M10 was when a single student misbehaved, and M12 was when a group of students were misbehaving. Now, I don't think there's any misbehaviors going on in this particular lesson, but we could at this point be clicking student actions, and we could be clicking student misbehavior actions quite easily. Same process. At the end of the student action, we click the M10 and M12 behaviors. Remember, we can click those at any time. So we don't have to wait till the end of when the student is misbehaving. We can just click that at any time. So let me just vocalize what might be going on. So the teacher asks a question and the student answers it, click. And then the teacher's back to teaching. In the meantime, CJ is misbehaving, and I could just note a misbehavior event occurred. But let's even give us more rich data by using student seating chart numbers. And this is a very easy addition to your data collection. So instead of simply clicking S5 when a student answers, I go over to my seating chart, and maybe I've asked a question, and then Sean starts to answer. So I'm already clicking on 5 when Sean is starting to answer. And when he finishes answering, I click on S5, and look what happens to our data table. It shows that student number 5 answered the question. And let's say I'm teaching, and I pause, and let's say Maria, number 1, asks a question. As soon as she's done finishing asking me that question, I click on S1. And again, it shows us that Maria asked the teacher a question. So adding the seating charts into the data collection is really pretty easy and doesn't take up much more time. Because you can stage yourself, and if you're using the seating chart numbers, you can say, okay, which student is starting to answer? Well, let's say it's number 2, and when they finish what they're doing, click. Or this is Kevin, and Kevin is starting to ask a question. He's saying, Dr. Berg, I wonder what might happen if blah, 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 and he finishes, and I go click. He just asked a question. So that's how we collect S data. Or misbehavior data, we could go over here and say, student 4 misbehaved, or student 1 misbehaved. And remember, we can do that at any time, no matter what else is going on, because the misbehavior buttons for individuals or groups do not affect the timing clock of the T codes or the S codes. So we can just insert those whenever we want to. Now, the Float Sync lesson is about a 20-minute lesson, I believe. And you don't have to practice on the whole 20 minutes. After 10, 15 minutes of practicing S codes and learning where those S1 through S5s are at, and then practicing using student seating chart numbers, you probably get the basic hang of it. All you need to do from that point on is develop a little more speed and a little more fluency to become like a master teacher coder. And that, in short, is how you code data using S codes. And now we're going to jump to the S code analysis. And for that, I'm going to bring up a lesson I have coded. Okay, now let's take a look at the data analysis from this floating and sinking lesson. I coded the whole lesson, or almost all of the lesson. The lesson was about 22, 24 minutes long. And the first thing I noted was that there was about 185 data points that I collected. Now, I coded it using both the T codes and the S codes, and that's why there's so many data points. But there was a fair amount of student engagement in this lesson, so there's quite a few S codes that were pressed while collecting the data. Remember that we have a lot of data and different types of data on this screen. First of all, we have the seating chart heat map. Some of those buttons will light up according to the amount of student engagement. But let's start right at the top. Let's start with Code Summary. Code Summary has a graph and it shows the raw data. So here we have S-codes S03, and there were 6 events when a student commented to the teacher. That's about 3% out of the total number of events I coded. The total time utilized for S03 codes was 2 minutes and 23 seconds, which is about 11% of the total lesson time. We can scroll down here and we can find the other S codes in the raw data. And we can also look up on the graph and we can find S3 when a student comments to another teacher. We can find S5 when students are answering questions. That was 46 times that students answered questions. Notice when I put my cursor over the top, it says S5, code quantity 46, and students answering teacher questions twice, and so on. So Code Summary shows us the raw data. Something I'll show you later on is more down towards the bottom, where the total number of S codes versus the total number of T codes can be compared. And that's a factor we want to look at later. Now let's go all the way down to student engagement and click on student engagement. Wow, now look what we have. First, let's start with the seating chart. We only had 5 students in this lesson, and all 5 had more than 5 instances of some sort of S code that was coded with them. Now, over here we see that 3 times we used an S code with no student number in front of it. If you're not using student numbers to begin with, all of your S codes will be under NC-0, meaning non-coded numbers. And the time here is when those events took place. So there was a non-coded S code entered at 9:59, 14:02, and 15 minutes right here. There are little black bars here for every time an S code was entered. So we can also isolate a particular student's responses or comments by clicking on this area. And this is student number 5, Sean. And here's all the times that he answered or asked questions. And here's on the map of the lesson that lasted about 24, 25 minutes. This is where his involvement took place, his engagement, asking questions or answering questions. And you can see it's pretty well spread out through the whole thing. If we go back to student engagement and put everybody's back up here again, we can see, except for the very beginning when there's an introduction, there is a lot of student engagement spread out throughout that whole time. We could also scroll down over here and look at other students. Student number 4 was Ed. Student number 2 was CJ. Student number 4, student number 2, student number 1 was Maria. And so it shows us where in the lesson our student engagement was concentrated or where it was to begin with. If you click on a black vertical bar, it should take us to that video segment that data point is linked to. Remember, all the data, S codes, T codes, M codes, they're all linked to the video via data points if you are collecting data with a videotape during the lesson. So that's one way to get at individual student examples. Maybe the teacher says, you know, I have a student with special needs. Let's take a look at how I responded to that student, student number 3, and I'm not saying this is a student with special needs here, versus student number 1 or versus the other students. Let's take a look at how I responded to that student. Was I encouraging? Was I discouraging? Was I responding differently? So we can click over here on these data points. S8, there's 2 examples of think, pair, share. S9, there's 2 examples of whole group response. If we go down to lesson timeline and we click on the red bar, that should take us to the whole group response area. It should start the video playing and show us that event in action. Now, when all your data points are connected to video, think about the amazing possibilities for coaching and feedback, and See Me Teach is a tool for helping somebody grow with regard to their teaching. You can immediately see themselves in action as related to a particular data point. Now, we also have some compiled data here. The number of S1 through S5 codes was a total of 9 minutes. So our total student time, it probably includes the think, pair, share, S1 through S9 and the whole group responses, was about 9 minutes and 26 seconds. We could also jump over to interaction patterns and look for some student data there. And I would look up to here, how many times did students react to each other, or did a student comment or a student action follow another student action. Sometimes if we go to here, we can see much larger numbers, particularly if we are facilitating a class where students react to each other or ask each other questions or comment on each other's answers or piggyback on their ideas. A large S to S count means there's a lot of student-to-student interaction going on in the classroom versus the teacher being the center of instruction and always responding to student answers, or the teacher following up something they did with something else that they might do. So in short, that's how we glean the student engagement data out of our See-Me-Teach analysis mode.
And finally, here's one more thing we can do from the quantitative analysis mode that is very useful in terms of self-reflection and also for coaching purposes or giving somebody feedback with living, vivid examples of that particular action taking place in the lesson. We can go to data buttons. Now remember, this is our running record, and this is the sequence of all the codes that we clicked while we were observing. And remember that there are about 257 of those clicks
in this observation.
So to, for this by hand would take a while. If we want to find a particular example of, say, a question type in action, or the way we give feedback in action, or how we handle management problems in action. So this data, again, is all linked to video. And how do we find it? Well, we can click on data button for any example of yes/no questions, and I click on yes/no questions. It found the first one, and there are 17 of them, 17 examples linked to video. So I could go through and look at any one or all of these examples and really focus in on how I'd things in terms of asking questions, or how a particular student might respond, or how I tend to respond to student responses, or when I ask students to clarify. For example, a piece of feedback I'd give my own future teachers, I'd say, you know, there's a couple times when instead of you clarifying for the student, you ask the student to clarify, which is a T11 code, of course. So let's go find those, and I would go down to my example. You said something about. Click on T11. It brings up the first one. There's 7 of those examples. We could look at any or all of those and paint a more vivid picture of what that looks like. And they can watch themselves, which is always more convincing than us telling them about that. So that's data buttons. That's how you use it. If you want to quickly go through them all, you just use next, 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 and you can look at them all.